وزدنا من فضلك علما. Continuing with our recitation and interpretation of the Qur'an by Imam al-Ghazali, we started the 10 mental tasks required after having discussed the 10 external tasks. And just to go through very roughly, the first mental task Imam Ghazali mentioned is to magnify the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second was to magnify the speaker. The third was to abandon the inner utterances of the soul. The fourth was pondering over the verses. The fifth was understanding the meanings of the verses recited. And today we will be doing the sixth mental task. Imam Ghazali says the sixth mental task is getting rid of the obstacles to understanding the Qur'an. Most people are hindered from understanding the meanings of the Qur'an for reasons and veils let down on their minds by shaitan, so that the wonders of the secrets of the Qur'an have become obscure to them. The Prophet ﷺ said, had it not been the case that the shayateen hover around the minds of the sons of Adam, they would have been able to look at the invisible world, meaning the unseen, the malakut. So the presence of the shayateen over the hearts is the biggest reason of a person being deprived of spiritual opening. And how did the shayateen take hold of a person's heart? This is because of not doing enough dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and overeating, indulging too much in talking, indulging too much in sleeping, and indulging too much in mixing with people. And he said if a person wants the spiritual world to be open, then they have to start cutting down on their eating, cutting down on their sleeping, cutting down on their talking, and cutting down on their mixing with people. Imam Ghazali says in the Ihya, when they talk about the khalwa or the seclusion that a person goes into, the private dhikr, a place that needs to be dark so that the eyes cannot see anything, a place that needs to be far away from creation so that he cannot hear anything. And the purpose for that is because the heart also has eyes, and the heart also has ears, and the heart also has understanding. And it is only when we block the external senses that the internal senses can then be given life. But our lives are completely bombarded, our senses are being bombarded all the time with messages, advertisements. And now with the new technological devices, we find that the bombardment is happening more and more. So a person is moving further. Their spiritual or their original essence is actually being bent. The fitrah is being bent. Some of the scholars would say that in our age, the fitrah of some people are being bent so much that even now at a later stage in their life, when they desire to come back to the fitrah, they will not be able to come to the original fitrah before the end of their lives. If we spend 30, 40 years of our lives, bending the fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us, the purity, bombarding it with messages, the dunya, our senses are, the images of the world is completely fulfilled or have completely filled our hearts. The process of purification now becomes extremely long. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to change a person in an instant according to the devotion and the determination with which a person is willing to come towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The veils obstructing the understanding of the Qur'an are 4 in number. The first is the direction of all care to the exact pronunciation of letters by producing them from the right places. Meaning tajweed is important, but tajweed can then also become an obstacle. The person is so concerned about whether he pronounced this word correctly and he take out the makhraj of kha from its correct place that he doesn't pay attention to what he's reading. He's more worried about how he sounds. This is done by a Satan entrusted with Qur'an readers in order to turn them away from understanding the meaning of the words of the Qur'an. This Satan always induces them to echo the letters of the divine speech, making them imagine that they have not come out from the right places. When the thought of a Qur'an reader is thus confined to the right places for pronouncing the letters of the Qur'an, how can its meanings be fully clear to you? So you say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Then he says, no, my ayn. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. No, the ayn wasn't right. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So he starts worrying about the recitation and the makhraj of the letters. This is a veil. Imam Ghazali says there is a special shaitan who is appointed to a person when they are reading the Qur'an to make them just involve themselves with the tajweed. The greatest laughing stock of Satan is the one who obeys him in a deception like that. And likewise, this person, some of the people, you'll see them when they start in the salah and say Allahu Akbar, and they think, no, my intention wasn't in the Shafi madhab. They have to make intention combined with the takbirat al-ihram. So they say Allahu Akbar, Allah, Allah Akbar, Allah. Sometimes the Imam's already going into ruku and he is still saying Allahu Akbar. Some people have this waswasa, this whisperings when it comes to tahara. They are washing when they are making wudu, and they're washing their faces and they think, no, the intention wasn't. They repeat. And some people have this waswasa when they go to the bathroom to relieve themselves. The second veil is the Qur'an readers being a purely dogmatic follower, a muqallid of a school of thought, of a madhab. And this is very important to understand what Imam Ghazali is meaning. We shouldn't draw our own conclusions. Imam Ghazali says the second veil is the Qur'an readers being a purely dogmatic follower of a school of thought, which is derived from an authority, and on which one has remained very firm with a strong mental zeal, by merely following what he has heard without arriving at it by spiritual insight and mystical vision. This is an extremely important statement of Imam Ghazali. Okay, sometimes the madahib that have come about that regard rulings, the ahkam, have come about from where? From the Quran. Now, a person who is studying the Quran, but he, for example, he is a Hanafi and he believes that masah or masah of the forehead should be done, as Imam Abu Hanifa says, a quarter of the head. Imam Shafi'i says even just one strand, you just touch the strand of your hair, must suffices. Now, when he's reading the Quran, even though, and obviously this goes for people who are understanding the Quran, even though he's reading the Quran with understanding, he is so dogmatic to his madhab, he refuses to see how it is possible that this verse lends itself to allow just one particular strand of hair. But look at what Imam Ghazali says. He says, by merely following what he has heard without arriving at it by spiritual insight and mystical vision. And this is extremely important. The madahib of the Imams were formulated through mystical insight and spiritual vision. When we say that the Imam is a kashifu hukmillah, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik and Imam Shafi and Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal didn't reach their rulings purely through intellectual exercises. They reached it through spiritual insight and vision. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them for this task. And this is why people placed emphasis on their madahib and said, we prefer to follow Imam Shafi'i because we did not reach the spiritual insight. The definition in the books of fiqh for someone who is a faqih or mujtahid, they say kashif or mukashifu hukmillah. What is kashifu hukmillah? Meaning the ruling of Allah lays hidden in the verses of the Quran. It is only a faqih who has spiritual unveiling that is able to then discover those rulings. So you need a source of spiritual unveiling of the rules to be able to make a certain rule. Because any person who reads the Quran themselves, not a single one of us who read the Quran today and who have read the Quran, and there are many even scholars in the world today who read the Quran and actually extract and derive rulings from there. We read the Quran with a mere shallow understanding. But if we have to read how, when we go into the proofs of how Imam Shafi'i went to this understanding of just a single strand of hair being permissible within the intricacies of the Arabic language, these were spiritual openings that came to them not just in one particular science, but in all the sciences that they were studying, in the Arabic language, and the usul al-fiqh, and the mustalah, and. Okay, and this is how they actually came to derive these rulings. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to protect the religion. How many people from the beginning of time, from the time of the four Imams, people have been fighting against the madahib, and we don't need the madahib. And people will come, and people will continue until the day of Qiyamah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen. Why? Is because this is how Allah chose to preserve the deen. A person who says we don't need the madahib is like saying we don't need cars. I want to go reinvent the car. A person, if we have now, for example, when we have the cars that we have today, the sports cars and what they were based upon years and years of research, and then before them, years and years of research, until we have a final product. So someone who says we don't need the madahib is like saying, you know what, we don't need cars. Or I'm going to invent the car. So he wants to now start again. And we say, okay, fine, go and invent a car. Take an average person. Can he go and produce a car? He doesn't have the expertise. He doesn't have the experience. He doesn't even have the technology. Likewise, the madahib have been an entire years and years of development until the madahib have become what they what they are to. And this religion that we have is a transferal of this legacy. One of the issues that affect a lot of modern Muslims is a sense of intellectual arrogance in that we can bring something new to the religion that the great scholars of the past didn't know. We have discovered, or we can discover things which was veiled towards or veiled to them. And it's almost a laughing stock when you find someone who doesn't even understand Arabic saying that, Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Shafi or Imam Malik or Imam Ahmad, they perhaps didn't understand these verses of the Quran. And so when we talk about being in the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and propagating the religion, it means we put ourselves in line of this legacy. We receive it from those who came before us, and we are merely vessels to pass it over. We are not required to put something new that didn't exist before. All the work, all of the what do we call the misinformation and all of the the misconceptions that people have in all the Orientalist work, whatever has been done, the scholars of the past have replied to all of these answers from the second Islamic century and third Islamic century. It is said that it is so comprehensive with some of these books. Some of the scholars would say when they read the books of the ulama of the past that they have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them such intellects that they spoke about things before their time. The scholars of the past, of over maybe 500-600 years ago, spoke on the concept of air conditioning, our modern day air conditioning, and the water that would come from these air conditionings and whether it would be permissible to make wudu with it or not. The only thing is we don't have access to the books and we are not reading these books. And so because we are orphans to our heritage, through being cut off with the language, we don't really understand our religion and the dynamism with which the religion has actually developed. Not just in one science, but in all the different sciences. And so they would say, Allah have mercy on a person who recognizes their deficiencies and stops at their limits. We should never, ever, ever disparage anything that the scholars of the past have done for the religion of Islam. And it is extremely important that whenever we make any statements about the scholars of the past, about the religion, that we understand the very, very true nature of what is being meant. And if we don't have access to the Arabic, one of the things that moved me personally, just to, if I can drift off the topic, to actually go and study Arabic was because everyone's got something to say. But everyone who's saying something doesn't even understand Arabic. And so whose opinions are we following? If my entire understanding of the deen is a translation of someone's opinion, and that book has been translated by a certain organization, and that organization is affiliated to certain schools of thought or certain ideologies because their funding is coming from, we are all just tools for someone else's agenda. Unless you can connect to the Qur'an yourself, unless you can connect to the Hadith yourself, we are still we are pawns in someone else's agenda. And this is a very serious thing to bring to mind, that we must make an effort to understand the religion. And if we can't do that, then we have to choose people who are trustworthy and God-fearing to be representatives of us or for us in our understanding of the religion. Otherwise, every Tom, Dick, and Harry will have an opinion about the Quran, about the Hadith, and this is what has led to the complete chaos that is happening within the Islamic Ummah. Of everyone has a different opinion. If people were humble enough to know their places, we wouldn't have any problems. When you go to a doctor, you go to a professional, you go to a specialist, right? Do you find someone saying, "Oh, you know what? This doctor says I need a hysterectomy. I can do it on my own. I don't need." Or you go to an optometrist. You seek out specialists in the field of wherever treatment is needed. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created specialists of understanding of the Quran, specialists of fiqh, specialists of tafsir, even specialists of the diseases of the heart. And so why is it only when we come to religion that we want to exercise our independent judgment? But when it comes to all worldly affairs, we go to specialists. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because this, as Imam Ghazali says, this is a veil. Imam Ghazali is using the opposite. He's using the opposite to say that you stuck to a certain madhab. That's why you don't want to understand the other opinions that the Quran might lend itself to. And I'm moving it to the problem that we have in our time, in saying that we are not even following a madhab, and then we expect to get understanding from the Quran. So if that is a veil, then this is even a greater veil. This is what the Quran calls hawa. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Have you seen the one who takes his own intellectual arrogance or his own... Hawa is not... Some people confuse hawa with desire, with shahwa, and hawa is not shahwa. Hawa has got nothing to do with your desires to eat and drink and cohabitation and all these things. Hawa is a cognitive function. It is an intellectual capacity that makes a person think that I know better, no one can tell me what to do, or my understanding is greater. This is hawa. And Allah says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى فَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. Have you seen the one who takes his hawa as his ilah? Meaning a person is so fixated on their opinion that they are actually worshipping their own hawa. They are worshipping their own opinions. I know better. No one can tell me what to do. No one can tell me that this is the meaning of the Qur'an. And this is Allah says that this person is worshipping, they're basically worshipping their own self. It's a form of intellectual narcissism. Okay, فَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ. So Allah sends him astray even though he has knowledge. And so knowledge is not sufficient. A person can read all the books in the world, but if they are not infused with the light of connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the light of prophecy through the chains of narration that have come to protect his understanding, then Allah says he is misguided. So this is a person whose belief has shackled him from going beyond it. So it is not possible that any idea other than that in which he has believed should come to his mind. So a woman who believes that the hijab is not obligatory for her, she'll read the Qur'an and she'll quote verses and she'll say this is why the verses don't mention anything. You find this. The verses don't mention anything about hijab. It's as clear as day, but they will find something. And a person who believes that every single woman should be covered with the niqab and even her eyes, they'll read the verses and they'll interpret it in their way, saying, look, this is what the verse is actually, this is what the verse is saying. And so if you come to the Qur'an with your own preconceived notions, you're going to find in it what you are looking for. And the purpose of coming to the Qur'an is to say, I leave all of my baggage, my intellectual baggage, my emotional baggage, my whatever it is, ideological baggage, and I want Allah to open up the meaning of the Qur'an for me. Okay, and obviously in today's times, the person doesn't understand Arabic, this is extremely difficult, and even if one understands Arabic, as Imam Ghazali says, it requires spiritual insight and mystical vision, which means a person cannot arrive to it by merely only reading the Qur'an. They have to be on a very stringent, intelligent spiritual exercise or spiritual course in their life, of the way they eat, the way they drink, the way they interact with people, being involved in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is only the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that enlightens the heart. And sending salutations on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and reading his life story, that enlightens the heart. Then with this heart, a person comes to the Qur'an will then reveal its secrets to a person. If a distant flash of lightning of knowledge is seen, and one of the meanings which is opposite to the meaning he heard from an authority appears to him, then the shaitan of purely following a school of thought dogmatically attacks him severely, saying, how can this new meaning come to your mind, seeing that it is contradictory to the meaning in which your forefathers has believed? Meaning sometimes a person will read the Quran and new meanings will open up to them, but because they are so dogmatic, shaitan whispers to them and say, but this is against your madhab, how can you allow this thought to come into your mind? And many times we find it, for example, people that don't believe, they say we don't have to follow the ahadith. Okay, we don't have to follow. They brought up on this thing that only the Quran is sufficient. The hadith is something, an innovation. We don't need to follow the hadith. And you give them the Quranic verse, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the Prophet gives you, then take it. Whatever he forbids you, then stay away from. So what happens when they read the verse and the thought comes to their mind, perhaps this school of thought that I am on is false. But then shaitan will whisper, but no, and all the whisperings start coming. The Quran is clear as day. So he considers this new meaning as a deception from shaitan, and he remains at a distance from it and guards himself against the likes of it. And so the worst thing is dogmaticism, the worst thing are preconceived notions when one comes to the Quran. Because then one starts using the deen for their own dunya objectives. And this is the worst form of, if you can even use the term prostitution of the religion. And how often doesn't this happen? We use the deen for political reasons. We use the deen for worldly reasons. We use the deen even for our own personal opinions. We're using the deen, using the verses of the Quran. For reasons similar to this, the Sufis have said that knowledge or ilm is a veil between man and Allah, and by this knowledge they have meant those beliefs, the aqaid, which most people have been firmly holding on to, either dogmatically following an authority or by mere reliance on causative sentences written by zealots of the schools of thought and delivered to them. As for the real knowledge, which is the uncovering of the actual condition of the thing known, and which is a vision by the light of spiritual insight, how can it be availed, seeing that it is the ultimate objective of desire? Meaning, even when we learn what we learn, that knowledge is a veil. The only reason you will truly know that is this knowledge, the haqq, is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spiritually opens up into your heart the reality of that knowledge. Pure dogmatic following of an authority is sometimes false in itself and is therefore an obstacle to the understanding of the meaning of the Qur'an. An example of this is a man who has a purely dogmatic belief that Allah's istiwa on the throne means He's being physically settled on it. For example, there are some people, they believe in anthropomorphism. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَىٰ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ, then He settled on the throne. This is a metaphorical statement, meaning Allah took authority, or Allah is in authority over the creation. But some people are brought up thinking Allah is sitting physically on a throne. So when he reads this verse, it's impossible for him to take this picture out of his mind, and he's created an idol of Allah in his mind. Because anything that the mind conceives, Allah is not that. Then in the case of the divine name, the Holy One, Al-Quddus, for example, there comes to his mind the meaning that he is pure from all that is ascribable to his creation. But that purely dogmatic belief of his does not make it possible for this meaning to be firmly implanted in his mind. Had it become strengthened in his mind, it would have led to a second meaning and a third, which would be interconnected. But he hastens to drive this meaning away from his mind because it contradicts his false belief, which is held purely dogmatically. Sometimes purely dogmatic following of an authority is true, but it too becomes an obstacle to understanding and to the unveiling of the meanings of the Qur'an to a person. The truth in which a man is obliged to believe has stages and grades, and it has an external beginning and an internal end. Concentration of man's nature on the external aspects prevent him from reaching the internal. This constitutes a veil, as we have discussed in the connection with the distinction between the external and internal knowledge made in the book of the Articles of Faith. This is the second book of the Ihya. Imam Ghazali is always the entire purpose of the Ihya to lead us to this, what Imam Ghazali calls ilm al-mukashafa, the knowledge of unveilings. True knowledge, Imam Ghazali says, is the spiritual unveilings which a person receives from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly in his heart. And he says the proof of this becomes more or stronger than empirical evidence. But how are we able to judge that if we don't have these spiritual unveilings? And we'll stop there because of time. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll discuss the third veil. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding and to protect us from hawa and to protect us from ever thinking that we know better than others. A person is to always come to, when they come to a lesson, even when we're listening to children talk, we have to always listen that perhaps there is something new I can learn. And the reason why sometimes the gatherings of the pious people find it boring because they say we're always doing the same thing. We're always going to the same dhikr. We're doing the same thing over and over. They don't realize the same thing over and over in the external is taking place. But on an internal level, people are traversing stages upon stages of new meanings. Okay, and if a person is spiritually blind, then they just judge by the external and they think, okay, these people just talk about the same things over and over again. Speaking about the same things over is the external. There is still an internal world which a person needs to have access to. آخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.